The morning sun peeked through the blinds as Detective James Mercer gulped down his third cup of coffee. His desk was piled high with case files, each one representing someone's worst day. 20 years on the force had taught him that justice wasn't always swift, but he'd made it his life's work to make sure it eventually arrived. The office buzzed with the usual morning activity phones ringing, keyboards clicking, officers trading stories from the night shift. James barely noticed it anymore. His mind was focused on the serial robbery case that had kept him working late for weeks. He was close to a breakthrough. He could feel it, Mercer. In my office now. Captain Rodriguez's voice cut through the noise. James sighed, setting down his coffee mug. Whatever this was about, it couldn't be good. The captain never called anyone into his office to hand out compliments. "Close the door," Rodriguez said as James entered. The captain's face was serious, more so than usual. "I'm pulling you off the robbery case." "What, Captain? I'm this close to—" Rodriguez held up his hand. "This comes from above me. We've got a situation that needs your experience." He slid a thin file across the desk. "Witness protection assignment." James didn't touch the file. "With all respect, sir, that's not what I do. Get Lee or Thompson. They handle the babysitting jobs." "This isn't a request, Mercer. This one's high profile. The witness saw Governor Wilson's aide get gunned down. She's the only one who can identify the shooter." Rodriguez tapped the file. "The Chang family has connections all over town. They've already tried to get to her twice." James reluctantly picked up the file and flipped it open. A photograph was paper-clipped to the top page. A young woman with dark eyes that seemed to look right through the camera. According to the file, her name was Sophia Chen, age 28, worked at her family's restaurant downtown. "Just until the trial," Rodriguez said, his voice softening slightly. 3 months, maybe 4. Then you can get back to chasing your robbers." James studied the photograph. There was something in her expression, not fear, exactly, but a quiet strength. "Why me?" "Because you're the best, even if you're a pain in my backside most days." Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. "And because everyone knows you're a by-the-book officer, no distractions, no complications." 3 hours later, James stood in the courthouse hallway, waiting. His service weapon felt heavy on his hip, a reminder of what this assignment might require of him. He'd read the file twice. Sophia Chen had been working late at the restaurant when she witnessed the murder through the back window. She'd done everything, right? Called 911, stayed on the scene, given a detailed statement, and now her life was in danger because of it. The door at the end of the hallway opened. 2 officers escorted a small figure toward him. As they got closer, James realized the photograph hadn't captured the weariness in her face or the way she carried tension in her shoulders. She wore simple jeans and a blue sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Miss Chen, I'm Detective James Mercer." He kept his voice formal, professional. "God. I've been assigned to your protective detail until the trial concludes." Her eyes met his, assessing him just as thoroughly as he'd assessed her. "Another one?" "This makes 3 different officers in 2 weeks. This arrangement will be more permanent." James gestured toward the exit. "I'll explain the procedures once we reach the safe house." The drive was silent. James took a roundabout route, checking repeatedly to ensure they weren't being followed. In the passenger seat, Sophia stared out the window, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "You don't talk much," she finally said as they turned onto a quiet residential street. "It's not part of the job description." "And what exactly is your job description, Detective Mercer? Is keeping you alive to testify?" He pulled into the driveway of an unremarkable 2-story house. That's it. The safe house was standard-issue functional furniture, stocked kitchen, security systems at every entry point. James walked her through the layout, explaining the panic buttons, the secure phone line, the rules about windows and curtains. "The previous officers let me call my parents," she said as he finished the tour in the living room. "Not happening. No contact with anyone until after the trial." Her face tightened. "They don't even know where I am. They're worried sick. They're also the first people the Chang family will watch. Any contact puts both you and them at risk." Sophia sank onto the couch, suddenly looking exhausted. My whole life stopped because I happened to look out a window at the wrong moment. James remained standing, maintaining his distance. It's temporary. A 3 months isn't temporary, detective. That's a season of my life gone. She looked up at him. The restaurant was supposed to become mine next year. My parents have been planning their retirement. Now everything's on hold, and I can't even tell them I'm okay. Something in her voice, the controlled emotion, the lack of self-pity, caught him off guard. Most witnesses he'd dealt with alternated between fear and anger. Sophia Chen just seemed determined to endure. I'll check the perimeter, he said, needing a moment away from those steady eyes. There's food in the kitchen. Make yourself at home. Outside, James circled the house, checking locks and sightlines, mentally noting potential vulnerabilities. This wasn't how he'd planned to spend the next few months. He had real cases waiting. Cases where he could make a difference, not stand guard while lawyers prepared their arguments. Through the kitchen window, he could see Sophia moving around, opening cabinets, her face set in the same composed expression. Just until the trial, he reminded himself. Just a job, nothing more. He couldn't have known then how those next 3 months would change everything. Couldn't have guessed that the woman making tea in the safe house kitchen would come to mean more to him than any case ever had.
What?
Began as duty would become something he wasn't ready to name. James checked his watch and headed back inside. Day 1 of 90. The assignment was clear, the boundaries professional. Keep her safe, get her to court, move on to the next case. Simple. Straightforward. By the book, it should have been easy. 2 weeks crawled by like molasses in winter. James settled into a routine that was both boring and tense all at once. Every morning, he'd check the perimeter before Sophia woke up. Every night, he'd do the same before turning in, sleeping lightly. On the couch downstairs while she took the main bedroom. During the day, they existed in the same space but barely spoke beyond what was necessary. Court prep meeting at 2, he might say, and she would nod. Do you need anything from the store? He would ask, and she would hand him a short list. It was professional, proper, and painfully quiet. Sophia spent most of her time reading books she found on the shelves or watching cooking shows on TV. Sometimes she'd stand in the kitchen for hours, trying recipes from memory. The smell of ginger and garlic would fill the house, reminding James of how long it had been since he'd eaten anything that wasn't from a takeout container. You should eat something real, she said one evening, pushing a plate toward him. Was some kind of chicken dish with vegetables he couldn't name. I'm fine, he answered, not looking up from his case notes. You've had 3 cups of coffee and a protein bar all day? It's not food. There was a firmness in her voice that hadn't been there before. I'm not asking, detective. James looked up, surprised by the challenge. For a moment, they just looked at each other, a silent contest of wills. Then, slowly, he reached for the forked at the first bite made him realize how hungry he'd actually been. The second made him realize what he'd been missing with all those years of takeout meals. By the third, he'd set his papers aside. This is really good, he admitted. A small smile crossed her face. My grandmother's recipe, she always said food should make you stop talking. It was the first real conversation they'd had, a small crack in the wall he'd built between them. But James was good at repairing walls, and by the next morning, the professional distance was back in place. 3 days later, dark clouds rolled in, bringing one of those spring storms that shakes the windows and makes the world outside disappear. James watched the weather reports with growing concern. Looks like we might lose power, he said as Sophia worked on another cooking project in the kitchen. There are flashlights in the utility drawer and candles in the cabinet by the fridge. She nodded without looking up. I grew up with typhoons. This is nothing. James checked his phone, then the security system. Both were still working, but the wind was picking up, howling around the corners of the house. Rain lashed against the windows in sheets. He was about to make another round of the perimeter when the house plunged into darkness. Perfect, he muttered, reaching for his flashlight. The beam cut through the sudden blackness, catching Sophia's calm face across the room. Candles are more practical, she said, already moving to the cabinet. They last longer than flashlight batteries. Within minutes, she had transformed the dark living room with the warm glow of candle flames. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, time seemed to slow down. Without the hum of electronics and the glare of artificial light, the house felt different, smaller, more intimate. James sat at the dining table, his back to the wall where he could see both the front door and the windows. Old habits. Sophia sat across from him, the candlelight playing across her features, softening them. "What made you become a police officer?" she asked suddenly. He almost gave his standard answer, the one he used at community meetings or when relatives asked. At holiday gatherings? Instead, he found himself saying, "My dad was a beat cop in the neighborhood where I grew up. He knew everyone, the shopkeepers, the kids, the old folks who sat on their porches all day. He made people feel safe." Sophia watched him, really listened in that way few people did anymore. "And do you make people feel safe?" The question caught him off guard. "I catch bad guys. That's what I'm good at." "That's not what I asked." Lightning flashed outside, briefly turning the windows white. Thunder followed almost immediately, loud enough to rattle the dishes in the kitchen cabinets. "I'm not really a protector," James admitted after the noise faded. "Not like this. I'm more the person who comes in after something bad has already happened, yet here you are. Here I am." He shrugged. "Orders." Sophia was quiet for a moment, turning her teacup in her hands. "My father wanted me to be a doctor. He and my mother came to this country with nothing, worked 18-hour days at their little food cart, eventually saved enough to open the restaurant. All so I could have choices they never had." "But you chose the restaurant anyway, James," said she smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Food is how my family shows love. Every recipe has a story, every meal is a connection. How could I walk away from that?" Her smile faded slightly. "At least that's how I felt before all this happened." "You'll get back to it," James said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. "Will I? The trial keeps getting delayed." "Chang family has money, connections. Right. What if they get to someone on the jury? What if this never ends?" Right. For the first time since he'd met her, fear crept into her voice. Without thinking, James reached across the table. "Hey, that's not going to happen." Sophia placed her hand on his. It was small and soft compared to his, but strong-toothed, the hand of someone who worked hard. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for keeping me safe." Something shifted in that moment. Later, James would look back and recognize it as the beginning, the point where the assignment became something more, where Sophia Chen stopped being a witness and became a person he cared about protecting. The storm raged on outside. But inside the candlelit room, a different kind of electricity hummed in the air between them. James knew he should pull his hand away, rebuild the professional wall, remind himself of all the reasons this was complicated. Instead, he let her warm fingers rest on his for a moment longer, while the candles burned low and the thunder rolled overhead. Something changed after the night of the storm. Small things, really. Morning coffee shared at the kitchen table, instead of James drinking his while standing guard by the window. Conversations that lasted longer than necessary, Sophia teaching him how to properly chop vegetables when he awkwardly offered to help with dinner. The safe house began to feel less like a prison and more like a shelter. From the storm still raging outside, the real threat that hadn't gone away. Despite their growing comfort with each other, James knew he was walking a dangerous line. Training manual, every departmental guideline warned against personal involvement with witnesses. But it was hard to remember those rules when Sophia laughed at his terrible jokes, or concentrated so intently on beating him at cards that her nose scrunched up. "You've got to tell," he said one evening, as she frowned at her losing hand. "I do." "Not," she protested. "Your left eyebrow goes up when you're bluffing." He gathered the cards to shuffle again. Not very much, just a little twitch, but it's there. Sophia touched her eyebrows self-consciously. No one's ever noticed that before. "I notice everything," James said, dealing the cards. "It's the job." Which studied him as she picked up her new hand. "What other things have you noticed about me?" The question hung in the air between them. James knew the professional answer was to deflect, to change the subject. Instead, he heard himself say, "You hum when you cook, but you don't seem to realize you're doing it. You always check the locks twice before going to bed, even though you know I've already checked them. You miss your parents more than you let on." Sophia's eyes widened slightly, and James worried he'd gone too far. But then she smiled, a small, private smile. "Maybe you should be a detective or something." The moment passed, but James felt to shift another brick in that professional wall crumbling away. The next morning, he received a call from Captain Rodriguez. The trial date had been set for the following month. Progress, finally. But also troubling news. An informant had reported increased chatter about the Chang family's determination to silence Sophia before she could testify. "They're getting desperate." Rodriguez said, "Be extra vigilant. We're trying to track down the leak. Figure out if they know where you are." James hung up, a cold feeling settling in his stomach. He'd gotten too comfortable, too distracted by his growing feelings. He doubled the security checks, changed their routines, and started sleeping in the hallway outside. Sophia's room, instead of downstairs on the couch, she noticed the change in him immediately. "Something's wrong," she said that night, as he checked the windows for the third time. "What aren't you telling me?" "Nothing's wrong," he lied. "Just being careful." Sophia crossed her arms. "Don't do that. Don't shut me out." James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "The trial date's been set for weeks from now." Her face brightened. "That's good news, isn't it? We're getting closer to the end of all this. The Chang family is ramping up efforts to find you," he admitted. "We need to be more careful, that's all." Sophia absorbed this, her expression turning serious. "I'm not afraid." "You should be," James said, more sharply than he intended. "These people don't play games. They find us when they find us," she corrected quietly. "Let's not pretend it's an if anymore." The certainty in her voice chilled him. She was right, of course. It was always a matter of when, not if. No safe house stayed safe forever. When it happened, 3 days later, James was almost relieved that the waiting was over. He'd just finished checking the backyard and was heading toward the front of the house when he saw the black car rolling slowly down the street. No headlights, despite the early evening darkness. His instincts screamed danger. He rushed back inside, already reaching for his weapon. "We need to go." Now, Sophia didn't ask questions. She grabbed the emergency bag they'd prepared and followed him toward the back door. They were halfway across the kitchen when the front window shattered. The sound of gunfire was deafening in the small house. James pushed Sophia down behind the kitchen island, returning fire toward the shadows moving across the broken window. Glass crunched under boots as someone entered the house. "Back door," James whispered urgently. "When I start shooting, run." "For the car? Keys are in my right pocket." "I'm not leaving you," Sophia insisted. "This isn't a debate." He pressed the keys into her hand. "Go to the checkpoint we talked about. Officer Chen will be waiting. More footsteps, more shadows." James took a deep breath, then stood and fired rapidly toward the intruders. Behind him, he felt Sophia move toward the back door. Good, at least she would be safe. He was so focused on providing cover that he didn't see the second attacker coming around the side of the house. The bullet missed Sophia by inches, splintering the wood of the door frame next to her head. James reacted without thinking, lunging toward her and wrapping his arm around her shoulders. Together they burst through the back door and ran for the car parked in the alley. More shots rang out behind them. James felt something burn across his upper arm but kept moving. They reached the car, and he practically threw Sophia into the passenger seat before jumping behind the wheel. The engine roared to life, and they sped away, tires screeching on the wet pavement. "You're hurt," Sophia said, staring at his arm where blood was seeping through his shirt sleeve. "It's nothing, just a graze." James kept his eyes on the road, taking random turns, making sure they weren't followed. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. "Are you okay?" She nodded, but her hands were shaking. The adrenaline was wearing off, and shock was setting in. James reached across and took one of her trembling hands in his. "Hey, look at me," he waited until her eyes met his. "We're okay. We made it." Hours later, they sat in a motel room 40 miles away. James had called in the attack, and Rodriguez had arranged the new location a temporary measure until a more secure safe house could be prepared. Sophia had insisted on cleaning and bandaging his arm, her touch gentle but firm. "You could have been killed," she said softly, as she finished taping the gauze in place. "That's the job," he replied, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "No," Sophia shook her head. "Your job was to get away, not to shield me with your body." James couldn't explain the terror he'd felt when that bullet had nearly hit her. The absolute certainty that he couldn't let anything happen to her, not because she was a witness, but because she was Sophia. "I can't lose you," he whispered, the words escaping before he could stop them. Her eyes widened, and he knew he'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. This was no longer about duty or protection or doing his job. This was personal, and that made it dangerous for both of them. That night, he requested a transfer from Captain Rodriguez, asking to be removed from Sophia's protection detail. He cited his injury as the reason, but they both knew the truth. "Request denied," Rodriguez said after a long pause. "We're too close to the trial date, and you're the only one she trusts." James hung up the phone. He caught Sophia watching him from across the motel room, her eyes filled with questions he wasn't sure how to answer. The new safe house was smaller than the previous one. One-bedroom apartment above a closed antique shop on the outskirts of town. The walls were thin, the plumbing temperamental, and the single window in the living room had a view of nothing but the brick wall of the neighboring building. But it was secure, and right now, it was all that mattered. James's arm still ached from the bullet graze, a constant reminder of how close they'd come to disaster. The trial was now just 2 weeks away. He should have felt relieved that the end was in sight, but instead, a heavy weight had settled in his chest. Since the night at the motel, since those 4 words had slipped out, "I can't lose you," things had been different between them. As if they were both walking on ice that might crack at any moment. Sophia had heard him on the phone with Rodriguez, requesting the transfer. She hadn't mentioned it, but he'd seen the hurt flash in her eyes before she'd turned away. "The prosecutor wants to meet tomorrow," James said over a dinner of takeout pizza, "and I'll prep before the trial." Sophia nodded, pushing a piece of pepperoni around on her plate, "And then it's over, right? Let's testify, and then I can go home." "That's the plan." James couldn't bring himself to meet her eyes. "The Chang family members will be in custody by then. You'll be safe. And you'll go back to your real job," she said quietly, "catching bad guys instead of babysitting witnesses." The words stung. More than they should have. Snotty started, then stopped. What could he say? That this had become more than an assignment to him? That the thought of walking away when this was over made him feel hollow inside. "It's fine," Sophia said, setting down her barely touched pizza. "I get it. This is just work for you." James watched her retreat to the bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. He wanted to follow, to explain, but what would he say? Department. Regulations strictly prohibited personal relationships with witnesses. His career, everything he'd worked for, would be over. And Sophia deserved to return to her normal life, not get tangled up with a detective who lived for the job. The next morning, Captain Rodriguez called with news. "We've got another witness," he said without preamble. "One of Chang's lieutenants turned state's evidence. He's willing to testify about the hit on the governor's aide." "That's good news," James said, glancing toward the bedroom where Sophia was still asleep. "More evidence is always better." "It's more than that," Rodriguez replied. "The DA thinks. With this guy's testimony, they might not need Chen on the stand at all. They're working on a deal now. If it goes through, she could be released from protective custody by the end of the week." James should have felt relieved. Yes. This was the best possible outcome. Sophia would be safe, wouldn't have to face the trauma of testifying, could go back to her life sooner. Instead, he felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. "That's ... good," he managed to say. "You don't sound convinced," Rodriguez noted. "Something I should know about?" "No, sir. Just surprised. That's all." "Well, don't tell her yet. Nothing's finalized. I'll keep you posted." James hung up the phone just as Sophia emerged from the bedroom, her hair still tousled from sleep. She looked younger somehow, more vulnerable. "Who was that?" she asked, reaching for the coffee pot. "Just checking in about the meeting today." The lie tasted bitter on his tongue. They rode to the courthouse in silence. James kept scanning the streets, checking the rearview mirror, hypervigilant after the attack on the safe house. Beside him, Sophia stared out the window, lost in her own thoughts. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Diane Powell, greeted them in a small conference room. "We've had some developments," she began, shuffling through papers on the table. "I wanted to discuss them with you personally." James tensed, wondering if she was about to reveal the potential deal with the new witness. "The defense has made an offer," Powell continued. "They're willing to plead to a lesser charge if we drop the first-degree murder." Sophia frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means less jail time for the shooter, but a guaranteed conviction." Powell looked directly at Sophia. "It also means you wouldn't have to testify." "Why would they offer that now?" James asked. "After all this time," Powell glanced at her notes, "we've been building a strong case. They know it. But there's something else you should be aware of." She hesitated. "We have reason to believe there may be a leak in the department. Someone feeding information to the Chang family." James felt a cold spike of dread. "That's how they found the safe house." "Most likely," Powell agreed. "We're investigating. But in the meantime, I'm inclined to accept the plea deal. It's safer for everyone, especially Ms. Chen." Sophia sat very still, absorbing this information. "So it could be over? Just like that? If I accept their offer, yes? Could go home as early as tomorrow?" The meeting continued, with Powell explaining the details of the plea arrangement and what it would mean for the case. James barely heard any of it. He was too busy watching Sophia's face, trying to read her reaction. Was she relieved? Happy? All he could see was a careful blankness that hadn't been there before. Back at the safe house, Sophia went straight to the window, staring out at the brick wall as if it held answers. "Are you okay?" James asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "For months, my whole life has been about getting to that courtroom, telling what I saw. Now suddenly it doesn't matter anymore." "Your safety matters," James said. "That's what's important." Sophia turned to face him. "Is it? Because it seems like everyone just wants this to go away now. The easy solution." "That's not fair," James protested. "Powell's trying to protect you." "And what about you?" Her voice was quiet but intense. "What are you trying to do, James?" Use of his first name caught him off guard. In all these months, she'd never called him anything but detective. Before he could answer, she continued, "I found the transfer request form in your jacket last night. When I was hanging it up after you fell asleep." Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Were you going to tell me or just disappear one day?" James felt the words stick in his throat. "It's complicated." "No, it's not," she said. "I thought you were different. I thought what happened between us, what's been happening, meant something." "It does," he insisted. "That's the problem." Sophia stepped closer to him. "Why is that a problem?" "Because I'm supposed to protect you. Not ... double quotes." He struggled to find the right words. "Not feel this way about you. And how do you feel?" she pressed. James looked at her, the woman who had faced death threats without flinching, who had cooked meals in a safe house to make it feel like a home, who had touched his hand during a thunderstorm and somehow changed everything. The phone rang, shattering the moment. James answered it mechanically, his eyes still on Sophia. It was Rodriguez. "Deal's done," he said without preamble. "Chen is free to go. No testimony needed." The new witness came through. James thanked him and hung up, feeling oddly numb. "What is it?" Sophia asked. "It's over," he said simply. "You're free to go home. The case is settled without your testimony." Sophia stared at him, her expression unreadable. "Just like that. Just like that." She nodded slowly, then turned away, moving toward the bedroom. "I should pack my things, I guess." James stood frozen, facing an impossible choice. Follow protocol and let her walk away, or acknowledge that what had begun as duty had become the most important thing in his life. 6 months could change everything. James knew this as he sat in his car outside the Chen family restaurant, gathering the courage to go inside. 6 months since he'd walked Sophia to her parents' front door after the case concluded. 6 months of throwing himself into work, trying not to think about her smile or the way she hummed while cooking, or how her hand had felt in his during that. Thunderstorm. The Chang family trial had ended with multiple convictions. The leak in the department had been discovered a desk officer with gambling debts who'd sold information to pay off his bookies. Justice had been served by all official measures, but James couldn't shake the feeling that he'd left something unfinished. The restaurant looked different than he'd imagined from Sophia's descriptions. Smaller, maybe, but warm and inviting, with red paper lanterns hanging in the windows and potted plants flanking the entrance. Through the glass, he could see it was busy inside, a good sign for a Tuesday evening. He'd driven by 3 times before finally parking. Twice, he'd nearly started the engine again to leave. What was he doing here? Sophia had moved on with her life, just as she should have, just as he'd told himself was best for both of them. The memory of their last day together still haunted him. After the phone call from Rodriguez, after learning she was free to go, James had helped her pack her few belongings. They'd barely spoken. What was there to say? He'd driven her to her parents' house, watched the tearful reunion from a professional distance, and then nodded goodbye. "Thank you, Detective," she'd said formally, extending her hand for a shake. He'd taken it briefly, feeling the softness. One last time. "Take care of yourself, Miss Chen." That had been it. No dramatic declarations, no acknowledgement of what had grown between them. Just a handshake and a return to their original roles, officer and witness. As if the months between had never happened. James had thrown himself into a new case the very next day. He'd earned a commendation for his work on the Chang investigation, but declined the promotion that came with it. Something about moving up. The latter, spending more time behind a desk, had lost its appeal. Now, sitting in his car on a cool autumn evening, he wondered if he'd made a mistake. Not about the promotion, he didn't regret that, but about walking away from Sophia without ever telling her the truth, before he could change his mind again. James got out of the car and walked toward the restaurant. Through the window he caught a glimpse of movement in the back, someone working in the kitchen, visible through the service window. His heart sped up. The bell above the door jingled as he entered. An older woman, Sophia's mother, he guessed from the family resemblance, greeted him with a warm smile. "Table for one?" she asked. James nodded, suddenly unable to speak. Mrs. Chen led him to a small table near the back, handed him a menu, and promised someone would be with him shortly. He pretended to study the offerings, though the words blurred before his eyes. What would he say if Sophia appeared? What could he say after all this time? Our special today is the familiar voice stopped abruptly. James looked up to find Sophia standing beside his table, order pad in hand, eyes wide with surprise. "James," she said softly. "Hi." It was all he could manage. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, falling just below her shoulders now. She seemed more relaxed, more at home in her own skin. "Beautiful. What are you doing here?" she asked. A fair question, when he'd been asking himself for the past hour. "Was in the neighborhood," he said lamely, then shook his head. "No, that's not true. I came to see you." Sophia glanced around the busy restaurant. "I get off in an hour," she said. "If you want to wait." "I'll wait," James replied immediately. And so he did, nursing a cup of tea that Mrs. Chen kept refilling with knowing smiles. He watched Sophia move through the restaurant, chatting with customers, laughing with the other servers. This was her world, the one she'd told him about during those long days in the safe house. Seeing her in it felt like watching a flower finally getting enough sunlight. When the last customer left and the closed sign was turned on the door, Sophia came to his table, untying her apron. "Do you want to go for a walk?" she suggested. "There's a park down the street." The night was cool, but not cold. The sky clear and scattered with stars. They walked in silence at first, the space between them filled with everything unsaid. "Your restaurant looks great," James finally offered. "Busy it is," Sophia agreed. "My parents are finally taking some time off. They went on their first vacation in 15 years last month. It's good. They deserve it." Another silence fell. James shoved his hands in his pockets, feeling like a teenager on a first date instead of a decorated detective in his 30s. "Why? Are you here, James?" Sophia finally asked, stopping to face him. It's been 6 months, I know. He took a deep breath. I've been thinking about you a lot. You didn't call. Not once. I thought it was better that way, he admitted.
Lit.
You deserve to get your life back without ... complications. Sophia studied his face in the dim light from the park lamps. And what about what I wanted? Did you ever think to ask me that? The question hit him like a physical blow. No, he hadn't. Asked. He'd made the decision for both of them, convinced he was doing the right thing. I'm sorry, he said, meaning it. I thought I was protecting you. Again. I never needed your protection, Sophia said softly. Not from this. She was right, of course. All those months, he'd hidden behind his badge, his duty, the rules. When the real threat had passed, he'd kept hiding from his own feelings, from the possibility of rejection, from the risk of letting someone matter too much. I missed you, he said simply. Every day. Sophia's expression softened. I missed you too, even though I was angry at you for just ... disappearing. I messed up, James admitted. I let you go because I thought that's what I was supposed to. The job was over, so ... so that was it? It's duty? There was hurt in her voice, but also a challenge. James shook his head. No, it was never just duty. Not after that first night during the storm. He took a step closer to her. I told myself it was wrong to feel that way about someone I was assigned to protect, that I was crossing a line. And now? Sophia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Now I'm not your protector anymore. I'm just a man who can't stop thinking about you. James reached for her hand, half expecting her to pull away. She didn't. I don't have a badge between us anymore. It's just me asking if we could start over. For real this time. Sophia's fingers curled around his, that same soft touch that had first broken through his defenses all those months ago. I'd like that, she said with a small smile, but on one condition, name it, adding no more deciding what's best for me without asking me first. James laughed, relief washing through him. Deal. They walked hand in hand through the quiet park, talking about everything that had happened in the months they'd been apart. When they reached the restaurant again, Sophia hesitated. Would you like to come in for coffee? My parents will want. To properly meet you, without all the... She waved her free hand vaguely. Witness protection drama. James nodded, suddenly nervous about meeting her family as himself, not as Detective Mercer. Sophia seemed to read his mind. Don't worry, she said with a teasing smile. They already like you. My father says anyone who would take a bullet for his daughter deserves at least a chance. As she reached up to kiss his cheek, James realized that some things were worth protecting. Even without a badge, and that the softest touch could become the strongest bond of all.